Okay, so some of you have been asking about a breakdown on the Maxon Airlines little animation that I made. So I figured I would take a few minutes and just kind of walk through some of my setup for that particular animation. Okay, so the animation itself is actually a little bit of trickery. So in reality, a 747 ferrying a space shuttle on top of it is going to be flying probably 400 or 500 miles an hour. At least I'm guessing that's probably where it's going to be at. So in order to mimic that, in order to get realistic results, you would have to animate the 747 here, and you would have to push it along in the z-axis, and you would have to animate that. Well, in order to animate something like that within 3D space, it would require a lot of movement, and this plane would actually be moving all over the place. So instead of animating just the plane and having the camera follow it through 3D space, it's actually sitting still and the camera is moving around it, and the emitters that are back behind these engines, you can see them here represented by the little square outline here. These emitters, and if I go and turn them on, these emitters currently have a speed of 55,000, and they have a birth rate, editor, and renderer value of 855. So if I were to swing around here to the front and hit play, you can see what's happening. The actual model itself is sitting still, however, and you can see it starts to kind of like go up, and then it's going to bank over slightly to the left. And you can see what's happening back here with the particles. And if I go back into the camera, there's the camera view there. So it's actually a little bit of trickery. The plane is not actually moving other than just the basic heading, pitch, and banking values. But other than that, it's sitting rather still, and just the animation of the particles here from the 4 emitters behind the engines, that's giving it the appearance that it's moving. Now also, I gave the camera a vibrate tag. So if we look at the camera here, you can see it does have a vibrate tag. And I just enabled the amplitude here for the position and the rotation, and I have very low values. And by doing that, it kind of gives the camera a little bit of odd movement. Instead of actually having a linear movement, it kind of moves it around a little bit as if it were more realistic. Okay, so now on to the lighting. As you can see, the background is actually a very large high-res image that I actually had to make in Photoshop out of some cloud images that I found on Google. And I took those images into Photoshop and extended them and used the clone brush in order to clone them to make them larger. And then I have them on a sky object. So if we were to go find this particular material, here we go here. You can see that the resolution is 4041 by 3600. Okay, so let's talk about the lighting. So instead of using a light dome like I normally use, what I decided to do was use global illumination. But in this case, I wanted to pick up the colors and the contrast from this sky image that I'm using. So instead of using the regular GI, what I used was the sky sampler. And what this mode does, it will grab the color and illumination information from your image that you're using on the sky object, and it will use that image to produce the color as well as the illumination for your scene. Now there's a couple of different settings here. If you go into sky, you can see the samples. Now by default, I think the setting for this is 64. And this setting here for samples works the same way that ambient occlusion would use. So if you use a very low setting for this, like 64 or 32, your image is going to be kind of grainy and blotchy. And it's going to be kind of dirty looking. But if you take this up, it's going to look a lot cleaner and a lot better, but at the cost of taking longer to render. So this is the settings that I used for the final render, which was 256. And what I will do is just quickly render this to the viewport to show you how long it will take. And with the sky sampler, it doesn't have to make any type of pre-pass or anything like that. It just grabs the color and illumination information from the image that you're using and just applies it. Now I also have my anti-aliasing setting set to 2 by 4. And you can see it's not really taking all that long to render. So you can see that really didn't take all that long. Down here the counter says 46 seconds, and that's actually pretty fast considering that I'm using high samples for the GI Sky Sampler as well as 2x4 anti-aliasing. Okay, so here is the scene file with the shuttle. By itself, this is the scene where it zooms past the camera really quickly. I've got 3 emitters that are attached to the shuttle, one on the left wing, one on the right wing on the very tip on the back side, and then the third one is up at the top of the rear tail. These 3 emitters are basically doing the same thing that the emitters were doing on the 747 engines. However, in this case, the pyrocluster material is very transparent. And obviously for right reasons, there are no engines on. So this would just be vortices coming off of the tips of the wing and the rear tail. So I'll turn those off, and if we just quickly play through this, you can see what we have here. Shuttle zooms by and the camera zooms into it and watches it fly off. Okay, so what I've done here is I've created some splines, and let me jump out of the camera. What's happening here is the shuttle is following the path spline, and the rail spline is determining the banking of the shuttle. So here we have the rail spline, which is this main spline here. The shuttle main object here has a line to spline tag, and it's telling it that the spline path is the main spline that I drew, and in the rail spline, in the tag attributes here, is the rail. So the way this works is you have to take the rail spline and you have to make adjustments to it. And usually what I like to do is take the main spline and make a copy of it. And then from there, you take your copy, rename it to rail, and then the rail spline is just pushed over slightly, and then it's raised up. Now if I was to go to point mode, and let me see about grabbing a point somewhere. Here's a point here on the rail spline. And watch what happens to the shuttle when I start to move the rail spline. You can see it's causing it to bank more or go back the other way. And if we push it over in this direction, it makes it go more, and then it's going to flip, and back this way will make it level out. So this is what I used in order to get the nice movement and banking for the shuttle. And the light setup is the same light setup that I used before in all of the other scenes. And I also have a light, which is an infinite light set to an intensity of 165 with area shadows. And this particular light is, you can see it back over there in the distance right there, right about the location where the sun is in this large image that I'm using on the sky object. So that is the only light in the scene, and of course, again, like I said, I'm using the sky sampler. Now in order to get the flare, I used optical flares for that in After Effects. So what I did was I went into the render settings, and for the save dialog, if you come down here to compositing project file, you can expand that down and just be sure to enable that for save. And the application, of course, was After Effects, and then include 3D data, and I just clicked that there as well. And then all you have to do is just render it out. Okay, now once you render out your image sequence, and I rendered this out as a TIFF sequence, and what Cinema 4D will do will create a AE compositing project file, and all you need to do is just drag this over into your project manager here in After Effects, and that will open that up here. You can double click on that and it will open everything up in your timeline. You'll have all of your solids here and whatnot. So as you can see, here is the sequence here, and I'll just scrub through this. It's probably going to be a little slow because I do have some color correction. I have motion blur, and I also have the optical flares running. Okay, so that's a pretty good shot. So I have my different layers here. I have the flare layer. Turn that off. There's that one. We have the camera. We also have the light. You can see where the light is at over there. I also have the Dodgy Texture. This is the texture that was provided by Andrew Kramer over at videocopilot.net. This was for his emergency landing airliner. I think it was American Airlines that he did. So he provided that, so I decided to just go ahead and use that as well. Let me turn the motion blur off here. I believe I have that on my main one here. So I have star glow, and I also have real smart motion blur and some box blur. Okay, so there's the image right there untouched with no post work. So I added the optical flare, and I also added some glow with the star glow, which is by Trapcode. So we'll turn that one on. You can see that adds the glow, and what that does is that just kind of highlights some of the specular from the light over here. Turn on the motion blur, and we'll turn on the box blur a little bit. And then of course we have the Dodgy Texture, which was actually kind of like that smudgy material like would be on a camera lens. That's what that was. And then of course the optical flare. Now for the flare, I actually have some color correction in here, and that was with a curve adjustment. So I just made some adjustments here just to kind of bring out those nice orange and red glows. You can see them there. Okay, so that wraps up this walkthrough on this breakdown for the Maxon Airlines animation. Hopefully this has answered some of your questions. I know a lot of you were asking about it. You wanted to see what was put together in Cinema 4D and After Effects with a little brief explanation of how it all come together. All right, so I think that about concludes it. Thanks for watching.